My son ignored me at the restaurant where I worked until his boss read the note. It was an ordinary Tuesday summer afternoon when I saw Marcus walk into the restaurant. My heart skipped a beat. It had been almost 3 months since we'd really talked. He looked different, sharp suit, polished shoes, that confident posture of someone conquering the corporate world. At 28 years old, my only son had become exactly what he'd always dreamed of being, a successful executive at a downtown tech company. I was carrying a heavy tray of plates when our eyes met. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, maybe even affection. But then he quickly looked away, turning his attention back to the colleagues accompanying him. 5 men in suits, all young, all talking loudly about business deals and investments. I put on a professional smile and approached the table. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to Riverside. Can I start you off with something to drink?" My voice came out steady, though my heart was racing. Marcus grabbed the menu and held it in front of his face, as if he were intently studying the beverage options he probably knew by heart. "Sparkling water for me," he said, without looking up. The others placed their orders. One of them, an older man with graying temples and a natural air of authority, watched everything carefully. I would later discover he was Richard Thornton, the CEO of the company where Marcus worked. I wrote everything down and walked away, feeling my legs tremble slightly. This wasn't the first time. For the past 6 weeks, since Marcus had started coming to Riverside for business lunches, this had become a painful routine. He would completely ignore me, and I would pretend to be just another waitress, serving just another customer. I returned to the kitchen and leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath. "You okay, Diane?" asked Carlos, the assistant chef, gently touching my shoulder. He was one of the few people at the restaurant who knew my story. "I'm fine," I lied, "just tired." Carlos looked at me with that expression that said he didn't believe a word, but he was too kind to push. "You know you can take a few minutes if you need to, right? I'll cover for you." "Thanks, Carlos, but I'm okay, really." I wasn't okay, but I had bills to pay, and feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to help with that. The truth was much more complicated. The truth was that I had raised Marcus alone since he was 5 years old, after his father left us for a younger woman and a life without responsibilities. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I came home from work and found only a note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore. You both deserve better." That was it. No conversation, no attempt to make it work, no consideration for the 5-year-old boy who still waited for his dad to come home and play catch with him. Marcus cried for weeks. "When's Daddy coming back?" he would ask every night. And I had to look into my son's eyes and say, I didn't know, when the truth was I knew exactly, never. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously for years, cleaning in the morning, telemarketing in the afternoon, and waitressing at night. I sold our car. We moved to a smaller apartment, a place where the walls were so thin we could hear the neighbors arguing, where the heat only worked in some rooms, where cockroaches were frequent visitors no matter how much I cleaned. I bought clothes at thrift stores and taught myself to fix everything from faucets to TVs because we couldn't afford repairs. I remember spending entire nights watching YouTube videos about how to repair electronics because Marcus's laptop, the one I'd saved up for 8 months to buy, had stopped working, and I simply didn't have the money to take it to a technician. But I made sure Marcus had everything he needed to succeed. School uniforms always clean and pressed. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to iron his shirts before my cleaning shift. Quality school supplies, even if it meant I ate instant ramen for dinner for weeks. Tutoring when needed, I negotiated with his math teacher, offering to clean her house in exchange for private lessons for Marcus. When he showed interest in computers in high school, I saved money for 8 months to buy him a used but functional laptop. I worked extra shifts, took every holiday available, saved every penny I could. I remember his face that Christmas when he opened that box. He cried. So did I. "Mom, this must have cost a fortune," he said, only 14 years old, but already conscious enough to understand the sacrifice. "You're worth every penny," I replied. And it was true. He was brilliant, my son. Always had been. His teachers told me that at every parent-teacher conference. Marcus has a special gift for problem solving, his science teacher once told me. With the right support, he can go very far. And he did. He got a partial scholarship to college, and I covered the rest by working even more hours. There were weeks when I slept only 4 hours a night, running from one job to another, but always making sure Marcus had money for books, for transportation, for everything he needed. I never regretted a single sacrifice. Watching Marcus walk across that stage to receive his computer science degree was the happiest day of my life. I was in the audience, wearing my only decent dress, the one I saved for special occasions, crying with pride as I heard his name called. He had graduated with honors. My boy, who had started life in a tiny apartment with a single mother struggling to survive, now had a college degree and a bright future ahead. But something changed after graduation. He got an internship at a startup, which quickly turned into a full-time job. Then came a promotion, and another. He moved from our modest neighborhood to a sleek apartment across town. Visits became less frequent. Phone calls became shorter. At first, I understood. He was busy, building his career, establishing himself in the professional world. It's just a phase, I told myself. He'll get used to the routine, and then we'll have more time together again. But months passed, and things only got worse. Our weekly dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly, then occasional. His calls, which used to be long conversations about everything and nothing, became short, hurried text messages. "I'm busy building my career, Mom," he'd say. "You understand, right?" I understood. Or at least I tried to understand. Until the day I went to visit him at his new apartment with a homemade cake, his favorite, chocolate with peanut butter frosting, the same recipe I'd made every year on his birthday since he was 6. When I rang the doorbell, I heard voices and laughter coming from inside. Marcus opened the door, and his face went from surprise to discomfort in a split second. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming today." "Sorry, honey, I should have called first, but I was making the cake and thought I'd bring it over personally." My voice died when I saw the 5 or 6 young professionals in his apartment, all holding wine glasses, all dressed in expensive casual clothes. "Sure, come in," Marcus said, but his tone wasn't exactly welcoming. He quickly took the cake from my hands as if wanting to hide it. "Guys, this is Diane. Just Diane, not my mom. Just Diane." His colleagues were polite, but clearly curious. "Are you family of Marcus's?" a young blonde woman asked, smiling. Before I could answer, Marcus interrupted. "Diane is an old family friend. She was just passing through the neighborhood." An old family friend. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept the smile on my face. "Yes, I've known Marcus since he was little." Technically true, but the omission was deafening. I only stayed a few minutes, politely declining the invitation to have wine, saying I had another commitment. When I left that apartment, I managed to make it to my car before the tears started falling. But I didn't give up on him. Not yet. I waited a few days and then called, asking to talk. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory, and for the first time in years we had our first real argument. "You're ashamed of me," I stated. Didn't ask. Marcus sighed, stirring the coffee he wasn't drinking. "Mom, it's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. Explain why you introduced me as Diane, as an old family friend. Explain why you looked so uncomfortable when I showed up at your apartment." He didn't answer immediately, and that silence said everything. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, rehearsed. "It's not that, Mom. It's just that you wouldn't understand the world I live in now. The people I work with, they come from families with money, with connections. They went to private schools, traveled the world, had every opportunity from birth. It would be hard to explain." "Explain what?" My voice rose, despite my efforts to keep it calm. "That your mother works as a waitress? That I didn't go to college? That we don't have money? That I raised you alone in a 1-bedroom apartment where I slept on the couch so you could have your own space?" "You're oversimplifying," he replied, and for the first time I saw genuine frustration on his face. In the corporate world, appearances matter. Connections matter. Where you come from matters. I need to project a certain image to be taken seriously, to get the best opportunities. And I don't fit that image. He didn't respond, but I saw the answer in his eyes. I saw shame there, but not the kind I expected. Not shame about his actions, but shame about me, about who I was, what I represented. "Marcus," I said, my voice trembling now, "you think I don't know what the corporate world is like? You think I've never met wealthy, well-educated, connected people? I've served those people dinners for years. I cleaned their houses. I answered their calls when I worked in telemarketing. And yes, many of them looked at me like I was invisible, like my work made me less human. But I was never ashamed of what I do, because I do honest work to support my son, to give you opportunities I never had. I know that, Mom, and I'm grateful." "You're grateful?" I interrupted, and now the tears were flowing freely. "If you were grateful, you would proudly introduce me as your mother. You would tell people about the sacrifices we made, about how we got here together. But instead, you hide me like I'm some dirty secret." Marcus looked around the coffee shop, clearly uncomfortable with the attention we were attracting. And that, more than anything, broke my heart. Even in that moment, when we were having the most important conversation of our lives, he was more worried about what strangers might think. "Mom, please, lower your voice." I stood up, grabbing my purse. "You know, Marcus, when your father left us, I promised myself I would do everything in my power so you would never feel ashamed, never feel less than anyone. I worked myself nearly to death so you could have dignity, opportunities, a future. And now you're using everything I gave you to pretend I don't exist." That's exactly it," I said firmly. "And here's what I'm going to tell you. I sacrificed for you my entire life, Marcus. I never asked for anything in return except your love and respect. Apparently, that was asking too much. I left that coffee shop heartbroken, but also with a strange clarity. I had done everything right as a mother. The problem wasn't with me or what I had done. The problem was with the values Marcus had chosen to adopt. The following weeks were the hardest. Marcus tried calling a few times, but our conversations were tense, superficial. He never really apologized, never really acknowledged what he'd done wrong. Instead, he tried to justify, explain, rationalize, and then he started showing up at Riverside. The first time I saw him there, I thought maybe it was a coincidence, that maybe he didn't know I worked there. But then he came back, and came back again, always with colleagues, always for business lunches, always completely ignoring me. Mariana, my fellow waitress, noticed. "That guy at table 6, she commented once. "He always requests you as his server, but then acts like you don't exist. It's weird." I didn't say anything, but she was right. Marcus specifically asked to sit at one of my tables, but then avoided all eye contact, spoke to me only when necessary, never acknowledged me as anything more than service staff. And every time it happened, the knife in my heart twisted a little more. Carlos tried to cheer me up. "You know you deserve better than this, right? Whoever this guy is, he's not worth your suffering." But he was worth it because he was my son. And no matter how much he hurt me, I couldn't just turn off my love for him. Then came that Tuesday, the Tuesday when everything changed. Back in the present, I grabbed my tray and returned to Marcus's table. I served the drinks with slightly trembling hands, but maintained my professionalism. "Are you ready to order?" I asked, pulling out my notepad. Richard Thornton ordered first, a medium rare filet with baked potatoes. The others followed his lead. Marcus was last, and when it was his turn, he was still looking at the menu. "The grilled salmon, please," he said to the menu, not to me. "Excellent choice," I replied, my voice professional and empty. "Anything else?" "No, thank you." As I walked away, I heard one of the colleagues comment, "Great service here, right, Marcus? You come a lot. You must know the staff pretty well." "Any special recommendations?" I stopped a few feet away, waiting to hear the answer. "I come occasionally," he replied vaguely. "The food is good. Everything on the menu is good." The knife in my heart twisted a little more. The lunch continued its normal progression. I did my job, serving, clearing, smiling at other customers. But my mind was elsewhere, going through years of memories. I remembered Marcus at 6 years old, running home from school with a gold star stuck on his math test. "Mom, look, the teacher said I was the only one who got them all right." I remembered him at 12, hugging me tight when we found out we couldn't afford the school trip that all his friends were taking. "It's okay, Mom," he said, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "We can have our own adventure here." And we did. We spent that weekend exploring every free park in the city, having picnics with homemade sandwiches, pretending we were on a great expedition. Marcus made a field journal, drawing all the birds and insects we saw. I still have that notebook. I remembered him at 18, opening his college acceptance letter with shaking hands. When he saw he'd been accepted, he shouted with joy and picked me up in his arms, spinning me around the room. "We did it, Mom! We did it!" We did it. Not I did it. Where was that boy now? When had he transformed into this man who was ashamed of his roots, of his own mother? That's when the incident happened that would change everything. I was serving dessert at a nearby table when I heard the sound of breaking glass. One of Marcus's colleagues, a young man with a red face suggesting he'd already had too much wine, had knocked over his glass. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth, dripping toward the floor and the expensive suits of the men sitting nearby. "Shit!" he exclaimed, jumping from his chair. "Sorry, guys." Instinctively, I approached to help, grabbing extra napkins from my apron and a clean towel from the nearby service station. "Don't worry, sir," I said calmly, beginning to contain the spill. "Happens all the time. I'll have this cleaned up quickly." I knelt down to pick up the pieces of glass, being careful not to cut myself. That's when my apron caught on something at Marcus's chair, a button or a loose nail in the wood, and when I stood up abruptly, a small photo fell from the inner pocket of my apron. It was an old photo, faded and creased at the edges from being handled so much. Marcus was about 10 years old in the photo, wearing his first soccer uniform. He was flashing that huge, gap-toothed smile, holding a ball, one arm around my waist. I was crouched next to him, also smiling, wearing my work uniform from the restaurant where I worked back then. A different place, but the same type of work. I always carried this photo with me. It was my reminder of simpler, happier days when Marcus wasn't yet ashamed to hug his mother in public, when he still said, "I love you," without hesitation. The photo fell directly next to Richard Thornton's plate, landing face up. He picked it up before I could reach it, carefully wiping off a drop of wine that had fallen on it. "What a handsome boy," he commented, studying the image with a genuine smile. "Your son?" I felt Marcus freeze completely beside me. The fork he was holding stopped in midair, halfway between his plate and his mouth. Everyone else at the table turned to look at the photo. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw panic in them. I also saw a silent request, almost a plea. He was begging me not to say anything, to keep his secret, to continue being invisible. And in that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was a deep sadness mixed with sudden clarity. I had spent years sacrificing myself, giving myself completely, making myself smaller so Marcus could be bigger. And now I was being asked to deny myself, to pretend that the most important connection in my life didn't exist. The silence at the table stretched out. Marcus was pale. His colleagues looked curiously between me, him, and the photo. Richard still held the image, waiting for my answer. "Yes," I finally answered, my voice calm but firm. I extended my hand and Richard gently returned the photo to me. "My son, this picture is from many years ago." "He looks like a great kid," Richard said, smiling. "How old is he now?" I heard Marcus swallow hard. I looked at him, seeing the panic, the fear, the shame, not of me this time, but of himself, of being exposed. 28, I replied. Then, because I couldn't resist, I added, "He works in tech, always been brilliant with computers. I'm very proud of him." "I bet you are," Richard said warmly. "Raising a son alone couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted. "But he was worth every sacrifice, every extra shift, every bill I had to juggle to pay, every night I spent awake worrying about his future. It was all worth it." Marcus was staring fixedly at his plate now, his face red. One of his colleagues, a young man with a mischievous smile, commented, "Wow, Marcus, you never mentioned your mom works here. What an incredible coincidence." Marcus didn't respond. Richard, however, was watching me with a thoughtful expression. There was something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or respect. "You know," he said slowly. My own mother worked as a waitress for years. It was her job while my father fixed cars in a small garage. They worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities. I never forgot that. I smiled at him, grateful for his kindness. It's people like that who built this country. The honest workers, the parents who sacrifice. Absolutely, Richard agreed. Then he turned to Marcus. You're very lucky, young man, to have such a dedicated mother. Marcus mumbled something that might have been agreement, but he was clearly too uncomfortable to elaborate. Then I did something I hadn't planned. Maybe it was impulse, or maybe it was something I needed to do long ago. Maybe it was the only way to make myself heard. I grabbed a clean cloth napkin from my tray and a pen from my apron and wrote quickly. My handwriting was shaking, my eyes were wet, but I wrote each word with deliberate intention. I folded the napkin carefully and placed it next to Marcus's plate. Your check, I said softly, knowing he would understand I wasn't talking about lunch. Then I walked away before he could see the tears in my eyes, before my composure could completely break. I went back to the kitchen and locked myself in the staff bathroom for 5 minutes, letting the tears fall silently. When I finally composed myself and returned to the dining room, Marcus's table was empty. They had left, but the napkin with the note was still there, folded next to a generous tip. He had read it but hadn't taken it with him. I didn't know if that was good or bad. The note said, Marcus, I gave you life. I raised you. I loved you unconditionally. I worked myself to the bone so you could have opportunities I never had, and I would do it all again without thinking twice. But I won't pretend I don't exist to make you feel more comfortable in your new world. You can choose to be ashamed of me, but I will never be ashamed of you, or what we did together to get here. When you're ready to remember where you came from and who was by your side every step of the way, you know where to find me. With all the love I've always had, Mom. I finished my shift in a state of emotional numbness. I served other customers, cleared other tables, smiled other professional smiles. But my mind was elsewhere, filled with memories and regrets. When I finally got home that night, my small apartment had never felt so empty. I made tea and sat on the same couch where I'd slept for years so Marcus could have a bedroom. I looked around at the walls we'd painted together when he was 15. He wanted blue, so we spent an entire weekend transforming that small space into something that felt more like home. I picked up my phone several times, wanting to call him, wanting to say I regretted the note, that I didn't mean to cause trouble, but I always stopped before dialing, because I didn't regret it. For the first time in months, I had spoken my truth. I had refused to be invisible. If that cost me my relationship with Marcus, then it would be devastating. But at least I would have my dignity. 3 days passed. I heard nothing from Marcus. No calls, no texts, no visits. I continued working, smiling at customers, serving meals, trying not to think about the note or what it might have caused. Mariana noticed my sadness. Trouble at home? She asked gently as we folded napkins before the dinner shift. Something like that, I replied vaguely. You know, Diane, you're one of the strongest people I know, she said. Whatever it is, you'll get through it. I wanted to believe her. On Thursday, my manager, Mr. Patterson, called me into his office. My heart immediately raced. Had Marcus complained? Was I about to lose my job because of the note? Because I'd revealed our relationship? Diane, I need to talk to you, Mr. Patterson said, and his tone was serious. Yes, sir, I replied, mentally preparing myself for the worst. There's a man here who wants to speak with you, says it's urgent, and he'll only speak with you personally. My first thought was that it was Marcus. My heart leaped hopefully. Who is it? A Mr. Thornton. Richard Thornton. That wasn't what I expected. The CEO? Apparently so. He's waiting at table 7. Diane, is everything okay? Are you in trouble? No, sir. At least, not that I know of. I left the office with wobbly legs. Why would Marcus's boss want to talk to me? Had I caused trouble for Marcus with the note? Was he here to ask me to leave my son alone? I found Richard Thornton sitting at one of the restaurant's best tables, alone, wearing an impeccable suit, but with a kind expression on his face. He stood when he saw me. Diane, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Please, sit down. I promise I won't take much of your time. I sat hesitantly, my hands clasped in my lap. Mr. Thornton, if this is about the other day, He raised his hand, interrupting me. Please, let me speak first, and call me Richard. I nodded, swallowing hard. That lunch, he began, was very revealing. Not in the way Marcus intended, but revealing nonetheless. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You see, after you left the table, Marcus was visibly upset. His hands were shaking so badly he spilled coffee on his shirt. He excused himself and went to the bathroom to clean up. Richard took a deep breath. While he was gone, I couldn't help but notice the note. It was there, next to his plate, partially open. Diane, I know I shouldn't have read it. It was an invasion of privacy, and I apologize for that. But I'm glad I did, because it made me understand many things about the young man I hired. My face flushed with embarrassment. I shouldn't have written that. It was emotional, impulsive. It was honest, Richard interrupted firmly, and necessary. Diane, can I tell you a story? I nodded, not trusting my voice. I grew up in a neighborhood very much like yours, I imagine. My mother, Elena, worked as a waitress at 3 different restaurants just like you. My father, Roberto, was a mechanic. They were immigrants, came from Mexico with almost nothing, looking for a better life. He smiled sadly. They worked their hands bloody to give me a shot at life. My mother had calluses on her hands from carrying heavy trays. My father's back was ruined from bending over engines 12 hours a day. But every night they came home and asked me about school, about my dreams, about my future. When I got into college, the first person in my family to do so, my mother cried with joy. She didn't understand anything about technology or business, but she understood that her son had a chance at something bigger. Richard looked out the window for a moment, lost in memories. In my junior year of college, I started feeling ashamed of them. My classmates came from wealthy families. They vacationed in Europe, drove imported cars, wore designer clothes. And there I was, the kid whose parents barely spoke English, who worked in service jobs. I started making excuses not to bring them to college functions. When they came to visit, I'd meet them off campus, away from where my friends might see them. I was building a new identity, and they didn't fit into it. He looked directly into my eyes. It was my grandfather who confronted me. He was a tough man, had worked in the fields for 50 years. He pulled me aside one day and said, "Ricardo," he always called me by my Spanish name, "you can pretend to be someone else. You can hide your roots. But in the end, you're only fooling yourself. And worst of all, you're hurting the people who love you most." I didn't listen, not at first. It took years and many mistakes for me to understand what he meant. And when I finally made peace with my parents, when I finally apologized for being ashamed of them, my mother was already sick. She died 6 months later. Tears glistened in his eyes. I would have given anything, all my fortune, my company, everything, for more time with her, for more opportunities to tell her I was proud to be her son. But it's too late for me. He took my hands. It's not too late for Marcus. Diane, when I read your note, I saw a mother who loved her son enough to tell him a hard truth. I saw a woman with strength and dignity refusing to be invisible. That's extraordinary. I don't feel extraordinary, I admitted, my voice breaking. I just feel broken. I understand. But you did the right thing. And as for Marcus, well, we had a very long conversation after that lunch. My heart raced. Is he angry with me? No, Richard said gently. He's angry with himself. As he should be. Richard leaned back in his chair. When Marcus came back to the table that day, after reading your note, he was visibly shaken. He tried to continue the meeting as if nothing had happened, but it was clear something was wrong. I ended the lunch early and asked Marcus to stay. I asked him directly, "That waitress is your mother, isn't she?" He tried to deny it at first, but I already knew the truth. Finally, he broke down and admitted everything. How he'd been hiding you, how he was ashamed of his origins, how he was trying to fit into a world he thought required a certain image. Richard shook his head. I told him that in all my 30 years of business, I've never promoted or kept someone who was ashamed of their roots. You know why? I shook my head. Because people who deny where they come from will eventually deny anything that no longer serves their purposes. Today, it's the mother who raised them. Tomorrow, it's the company that hired them when no one else would. The day after tomorrow, it's the colleague who helped them when they needed it. Loyalty starts at home, Diane. If you can't be loyal to the person who gave you life, how can I trust you'll be loyal to me or my company? His words resonated deeply with me. So what happened? I asked hesitantly. I put him on administrative leave. Told him he had a week to think seriously about his values, about who he wants to be. It's not a punishment exactly. It's an opportunity for reflection. Because Diane, Marcus is brilliant. He has the potential to go very far in our company. But not with this mentality. Not by denying the things and people that made him who he is. Richard stood to leave. I gave him a clear choice. He can come back as the person he's pretending to be. Someone polished but hollow, without roots, without real character. Or he can come back as the person he really is, the son of an extraordinary woman who sacrificed everything for him, someone who knows the value of hard work because he saw it firsthand. Only one of those people has a future at my company. He paused at the door. Oh, and Diane, there's one more thing. We're looking for an HR manager. Someone who understands people, who knows what it's like to struggle, who has genuine empathy. Your son mentioned you balanced 3 jobs for years, raised a child alone, sacrificed repeatedly for someone else's well-being. Those are exactly the qualifications I'm looking for. I was speechless. Mr. Thornton, Richard, I don't have a college degree, no corporate experience. You have life experience, he interrupted. You managed impossible resources, time, money, energy, for years. You motivated and inspired at least one person to achieve more than they thought possible. You demonstrated loyalty, determination, and unconditional love. Diane, I built a billion-dollar company, and I can tell you with certainty, skills can be taught, character cannot. He placed a business card on the table. Think about it. You don't need to decide now, but if you're interested, call this number. We'd put you through training, of course, and you'd start in a more junior position before taking on the full role. But honestly, I think you'd be perfect for it. After he left, I sat at that table for a long time, staring at the business card, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me was shocked, another part hopeful, and yet another still angry. Angry that it took Marcus's boss intervening for my son to see what he was doing. I put the card in my pocket and went back to work, but my mind was spinning. Could I really work at the same company as Marcus? Wouldn't that be awkward? And more importantly, would Marcus really learn anything from all this? Or would he just resent me more? The next 3 days were torturous. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped, hoping it was Marcus. But he never called. I talked to Carlos about the job offer. You should take it, he encouraged me. Diane, how long have you worked here? 10 years? 12? And you still make minimum wage plus tips. There's no future in that. No growth. Take the opportunity. But what if Marcus gets angry? What if this makes everything worse between us? Carlos shook his head. With all due respect, Diane, you've spent your whole life putting Marcus first. Maybe it's time to put yourself first for once. His words echoed in my mind. On Sunday, my usual day off, I was at home cleaning, using physical work to calm my anxious mind. I was on my knees scrubbing the kitchen floor when I heard a knock at the door. My heart stopped. I stood up, wiped my hands on my apron, and quickly looked at myself in the hallway mirror. I was in old clothes, hair tied back, face without makeup. I wasn't prepared for visitors. I opened the door and found Marcus standing there. He looked terrible. He had deep circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. His hair was disheveled, not with the careful styling he normally wore, but as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, clothes I hadn't seen him wear in years, not since before he started in the corporate world. And his eyes were red and swollen, as if he'd been crying for days. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on the word. That was all he could say before he completely broke down. He fell to his knees right there on the doorstep, deep, uncontrollable sobs shaking his body. I pulled him inside and held him while he cried on my shoulder, exactly as I used to when he was a child and had a nightmare or hurt himself on the playground. I locked the door, guided him to the couch, and simply held him while he released everything, all the guilt, all the shame, all the regret. I don't know how long we stayed like that. 15 minutes? Half an hour? Time seemed to have stopped. I just held my son and let him cry, stroking his back as I did when he was little, murmuring that it was okay, that I was there. When the sobs finally subsided to ragged breaths, when he could calm down enough to speak, we sat on my old couch. The same one where he used to do homework while I worked double shifts. The same one where I slept so he could have a bedroom. "Mom, I screwed up everything," he began, his voice hoarse and broken. "I screwed up so badly, so deeply, that I don't even know if I can fix it. Marcus, please, let me talk. I need to say this. If I don't say it now, I'll never be able to." He wiped his eyes with trembling hands. "I spent the last week doing nothing but thinking. Richard gave me a week off, but it wasn't to relax. It was to force me to face who I'd become." He took a deep breath, fighting for composure. "When I entered the corporate world, it was so different from everything I knew. Everyone came from wealthy families, from private schools. They talked about ski vacations in Aspen, about summer homes in Tuscany, about grandparents who were senators or CEOs of famous companies. And Mom, I came from a one-bedroom apartment where my mother slept on the couch so I could have my own space, where we ate mac and cheese 4 times a week because that's all we could afford, where my summer vacation was walking to the city park with sandwiches in bread bags." Tears started falling again. "At first, I tried to be honest. I mentioned you once or twice, talked vaguely about coming from a working-class family. But I saw how people looked at me. It wasn't contempt exactly. It was condescension, like I was an inspirational story, but not really one of them. So I started omitting things. First, I stopped mentioning you were a waitress. Then I stopped talking about you completely. I'd change the subject when someone asked about family. I'd make excuses about why you couldn't come to events." He covered his face with his hands. Every little lie, every little omission made the next one easier. It was like I was building a new identity, a new story of my life, and you didn't fit into it. And I convinced myself it was for the best, that I was protecting you, protecting myself, protecting my career. "But you weren't," I said softly. "No," he agreed, his voice breaking. "I was just being a selfish coward. I was so desperate to be accepted, to be seen as equal to my colleagues, that I betrayed the person who loves me most in the world." Marcus looked at me with eyes full of pain. "Mom, do you know what this past week showed me?" Richard made me do an exercise. He told me to write 2 lists, one of all the things my wealthy colleagues have done for me, and another of all the things you've done. He laughed bitterly. The first list had 3 items. 3. Invited me to happy hours, shared industry contacts, made me feel accepted. And the second list, Mom, I filled 6 pages and still wasn't finished. He pulled a crumpled notebook from his pocket. "Can I read some?" I nodded, my own vision blurred by tears. "Worked 3 jobs to give me a roof over my head. Slept on the couch for 12 years so I could have a bedroom. Went without new clothes so I could have school uniforms. Taught herself to fix electronics by watching YouTube videos so I could have a computer. Negotiated with teachers to get me free tutoring. Sold her car to pay my first semester tuition." His voice was breaking on every word. "Worked sick more times than I can count. Never bought anything for herself that wasn't absolutely necessary. Ate instant ramen for dinner so I could have meat. Walked miles in winter to save bus money that could go toward my books." He wiped his eyes. "Held me when Dad left and told me it would be okay, even when she was broken herself. Never complained, never made me feel guilty, never made me feel like we were poor or less than others. Taught me that honest work is dignified, that character matters more than money, that love is action, not just words." Marcus closed the notebook, unable to continue. 6 pages, Mom. 6 pages of sacrifices you made, lessons you taught me, love you demonstrated. And how did I repay you? By pretending you don't exist. By being ashamed of the strongest, most courageous woman I've ever known." He gripped my hands tightly. When Richard showed me what I'd become, when he forced me to really see what I was doing, Mom, I got sick. Literally sick. I went to the bathroom and threw up from disgust with myself. Marcus, no, please, let me finish. I need to say it all. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Richard told me about his own mother, about how he was ashamed of her, about how she died before he could make amends. And he told me something I can't get out of my head. He said, Marcus, you think being successful means forgetting where you came from, but true success is carrying your story with you and using it to become a better person, to help others who are struggling the way you struggled. If you deny your roots, your success has no meaning. It's just hollow. Marcus looked around my apartment, the walls we painted together, the old but well-maintained furniture, the photos of him at every stage of growing up covering every available surface. This place, he said softly, always seemed so small when I was growing up. I couldn't wait to leave, to have my own big modern space. But now, looking at it, Mom, this place is huge. It's huge because of the love it contains, the sacrifices it represents, the memories it holds. He pointed to the wall where we kept growth charts. You still have that? Of course I do. It's part of our story. My expensive modern apartment, Marcus said, has no story, has no soul. It's just space. Professionally furnished, decorated by an interior designer, everything perfect but meaningless. I hate being there. I held his face in my hands. Marcus, listen to me. I forgave you the moment I wrote that note, because that's what mothers do. We forgive, even when it hurts deeply. But forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was right. I know. You hurt me more than I thought possible, made me feel invisible, disposable, like all the years of sacrifice meant nothing. Like our bond, the most important thing in my life, was something to be ashamed of. He nodded miserably. I know, and it kills me, Mom. It kills me knowing I did that to you. But, I continued, I also understand. The world is cruel sometimes. It tells people they need to be a certain way, come from a certain background, have a certain image to succeed. And when you're young and ambitious and desperate to prove your worth, it's easy to believe those lies. I wiped the tears from his face with my thumbs, as I used to when he was little. What matters now isn't how much you hate yourself for what you did. What matters is what you learn from it, how you grow, who you choose to be from here on. I want to be someone you can be proud of, he whispered. Marcus, I've always been proud of you. Even when you hurt me, even when you were ashamed of me, I never stopped being proud of your accomplishments. But now, for the first time in months, I'm proud not just of what you've achieved, but of who you're becoming. He hugged me tight, like he hadn't since he was a child. I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry. So sorry. I know, sweetheart. I know. And I love you too. Always have. Always will. We stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, healing the wounds that had been opened, rebuilding the bridge that had been burned. When we finally pulled apart, Marcus wiped his eyes and tried to smile. So, Richard mentioned he offered you a job? I laughed through my tears. He did. But Marcus, I don't know if it's a good idea. Working at the same company as you, it might be awkward. Mom, he interrupted me firmly, please take the job. Marcus, no, listen to me. Please take it. Not because I work there, but because you deserve it. You deserve more than working yourself to death at 3 jobs. You deserve to have health benefits, a good salary, the chance to grow in a career. He held my hands. And honestly, I want you there. I want to be able to see you at the office, to proudly introduce you to people as my mother, to have lunch together. I want to fix this, Mom. I want to make you a visible, celebrated part of my professional life, not something I hide. Are you sure? Absolutely. Please, Mom, give yourself this chance. I thought about it. Thought about how many years I'd worked myself to the bone, how many opportunities I'd passed up because I was too busy just surviving. Thought about Carlos saying it was time to put myself first. Okay, I finally said. I'll call Richard tomorrow. The smile that lit up Marcus's face was genuine, reaching his eyes for the first time in months. We spent the rest of that Sunday together, really together, for the first time since before his graduation. We cooked his favorite lasagna together, him chopping vegetables while I prepared the sauce, working side by side in my small kitchen, laughing and talking like we used to. Over dinner, Marcus told me stories from work, but this time with honesty. He talked about the stressful parts, about the pressure to conform, about his insecurities. And I shared stories from the restaurant, about the regular customers he used to know when he'd visit me at work years ago, about Carlos and Mariana and the other people who had become my work family. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, I used to think success meant leaving all that behind. The struggle, the hardship, ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. But now I realize that was the most real, most valuable part of my life. There's no shame in honest work, I said. There never was. I know that now. Richard said something similar. He said the best leaders at his company are those who remember what it's like to struggle, who treat everyone, from the CEO to the janitor, with equal respect. When Marcus was about to leave that night, he hesitated at the door. Mom, there's one more thing I want to do. Tomorrow night, can I take you to dinner at Riverside? Marcus, you don't need to. I want to. I want to take you there not as an employee, but as my guest. I want to sit at one of the best tables and proudly introduce you as my mother to everyone who's there, my colleagues, my boss, anyone. I want everyone to know who you are to me. I smiled through fresh tears. I would love that. And he did exactly that. Monday night, Marcus picked me up in his car, that expensive car I'd only seen in photos, wearing his best suit. But this time, he'd also brought something special, a bouquet of daisies, my favorites since forever. For the most important woman in my life, he said, handing them to me. When we arrived at Riverside, my colleagues were shocked to see me as a customer. Mariana almost dropped a tray when she saw us walking in. Carlos came out of the kitchen to greet me, a huge smile on his face. Diane, you look beautiful. Is this a date? He joked. Even better, Marcus said, putting his arm around my shoulders. I'm taking my mom to dinner. She deserves the best. The expression on Carlos's face was priceless. He looked between me and Marcus, finally understanding. So you're the reason, he said softly to Marcus. The reason she's been so sad. Marcus had the decency to look embarrassed. Yes, but I'm fixing it, or at least trying to. Mr. Patterson, my manager, personally led us to one of the best tables, by the window, overlooking the river, normally reserved for VIPs and special occasions. For our Diane and her son, he said warmly, and Marcus didn't miss the opportunity. My mother, Marcus corrected, making sure his voice was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Diane is my mother, and I'm the luckiest man in the world because of it. Throughout dinner, Marcus made a point of treating me like the most important person in the restaurant. He pulled out my chair, poured my water, asked my opinion on every dish. And every time someone he knew passed by the table, and several acquaintances did, he proudly introduced me. This is Jake from the sales department. Jake, this is my mother, Diane. She's worked here for years. In fact, she's probably served you before. She's the reason I got to where I am. This is Amy from accounting. Amy, my mother, Diane. She raised me alone, working 3 jobs simultaneously. Everything I am, I owe to her. Midway through dinner, Richard Thornton entered the restaurant with his wife, an elegant woman with gray hair and a warm smile. When they saw us, Richard immediately approached. Marcus, Diane, what a wonderful surprise. He was genuinely smiling. Please, allow me to introduce my wife, Catherine. Catherine, this is Diane, who I told you about, and her son, Marcus. Catherine shook my hand warmly. Diane, Richard hasn't stopped talking about you. Said you're exactly the kind of person he wants in his company. Thank you, I stammered, not knowing what to say. Did she accept the offer? Richard asked hopefully. I'm calling tomorrow, I promised. Excellent. Can't wait to have you on the team. Richard turned to Marcus. And you, young man, ready to come back? Marcus nodded seriously. Yes, sir. And Richard, thank you for everything. For forcing me to see what I was becoming, for giving me the chance to make things right. I won't disappoint you. Don't disappoint yourself, Richard corrected. And especially, don't disappoint your mother. She's the only one whose opinion really matters. After Richard and Catherine went to their own table, Marcus and I sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know," Marcus said, looking around the restaurant, "I used to come here and see you working, and all I felt was embarrassment. Shame that someone might connect the waitress to the executive in a suit. And now? Now?" He smiled, taking my hand across the table. "Now I look around and see the place where my mother worked to give me a better life. I see the tables she cleaned, the trays she carried, the smiles she forced even when she was exhausted. And I feel proud. Proud of her. Proud of us. Proud of our story." "Oh, Marcus," I said, dabbing my eyes with the napkin. "Mom, can I make you a promise?" "Of course." He looked directly into my eyes, his expression serious and sincere. "I promise never to be ashamed of where I came from again. I promise to honor you and our past in everything I do. I promise to use my position not to distance myself from my roots, but to help others who are struggling the way we struggled." His voice grew stronger, more determined. "I promise to be the kind of man you raised, someone who values character over status, integrity over image, love over ambition. And I promise to make sure everyone knows that any success I have is because my mother believed in me when no one else did, sacrificed for me when she had nothing to give, and loved me unconditionally even when I didn't deserve it." I was crying openly now, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of renewed hope. "I accept your promises," I said softly. "And I make one to you too. I will never stop being proud of you, Marcus. No matter what happens, no matter where life takes us. You are my greatest achievement, my greatest love." We finished dinner in peace, a peace we hadn't felt in months. When the check came, Marcus grabbed it before I could, but not without noting the generous amount he left as a tip. "For Mariana," he explained, "and Carlos and everyone else who took care of you when I wasn't." In the weeks that followed, I started the new position. As Richard had promised, I began as an assistant, going through intensive training in HR procedures, corporate software, company policies. It was scary, sometimes exhausting, but also exciting in ways I hadn't felt in years. Marcus kept his word. He didn't just acknowledge me at the office, he celebrated me. When we'd run into each other in the elevator or cafeteria, he'd always stop to chat, to ask how I was doing, to introduce me to people I hadn't met yet. "This is my mother, Diane," he'd say. And every time, my heart would fill with pride and love. Slowly, I began to develop my own reputation at the company. My life experience, years managing impossible resources, mediating conflicts between co-workers at restaurants, motivating people in difficult circumstances, proved surprisingly valuable in the corporate world. Within 6 months, I was leading a diversity and inclusion initiative, focusing especially on recruiting and supporting non-traditional candidates. People like me, who might not have fancy degrees, but had valuable life experience and strong work ethic. "You have a gift for this," Richard told me in a performance review, "for seeing potential where others only see gaps in resumes." "It's because I know what it's like to be underestimated," I replied. "I know what it's like to have skills that don't fit neatly into traditional job descriptions." Within a year, I was leading the entire HR department, overseeing a team of 12 people. When Richard offered me the promotion, I hesitated only for a moment before accepting. "Are you sure? This means supervising people with MBAs, people who studied for this." "Diane," Richard said firmly, "you studied for this. You studied at the University of Real Life, under circumstances that would have broken weaker people. I trust you completely." The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had to deny me for me to finally find myself, finally realize my own worth, finally achieve potential I didn't even know I had. But the greatest reward wasn't the new job or the better salary or the impressive title. It was watching Marcus transform back into the man I always knew he could be. He started volunteering in mentorship programs for young people from low-income families. If someone had told me that being proud of my roots was strength, not weakness, I might have avoided years of stupid behavior, he explained. He became a vocal advocate in the company for more inclusive hiring practices, arguing that talent comes from all kinds of backgrounds. At his wedding, 3 years after our reconciliation, he gave a speech that made everyone cry. Marcus's bride, Elena, named after Richard's mother, was a public school teacher who came from a background similar to ours. They had met at one of his volunteer events. For a long time, Marcus said to the room full of guests, colleagues, friends, family, I ran from my story. I was ashamed of where I came from, ashamed of the sacrifices my mother made, ashamed of not coming from money or privilege. He looked directly at me, sitting in the front row. But my mother, Diane, taught me the most important lesson, even though it took me a while to understand it. She taught me that real strength doesn't come from hiding who you are, but from embracing it completely. That success without integrity is meaningless. That love is action, not just words. His voice became emotional. Mom, there was a time when I was ashamed of our story, but now I realize it's my greatest source of pride. You taught me that character matters more than money, that honest work is dignified, that unconditional love can overcome any obstacle. He raised his glass. So this toast isn't just for my beautiful bride, Elena. It's also for my mother, Diane, the strongest woman I know, who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities, who loved me even when I didn't deserve it, who taught me what it really means to be successful. Mom, thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Now, when I look back on that day at the restaurant, the day I wrote that note, the day I refused to be invisible, I realize it was a turning point for both of us. Sometimes, true love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. It means refusing to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. It means having the courage to speak difficult truths, even when it hurts. And sometimes, it takes the intervention of a wise boss, an honest note, and a week of forced reflection to remind someone that our true identity isn't in what we achieve or accumulate, but in who we are deep down, shaped by the people who loved us when we had nothing else to offer but ourselves. Marcus learned this the hard way, but he learned. And because of that, our story had the happy ending we both deserved. Not perfect, not without scars, but real, honest, and filled with the kind of love that survives even our worst moments. Today, when Marcus introduces me to people, whether at corporate events, dinners with friends, or just casual encounters, he never hesitates. This is my mother, Diane, he says, and his pride is palpable. And every time he says it, every time I see the love and respect in his eyes, I'm reminded that every sacrifice was worth it. Not because I raised a successful executive or because I now have a good job, but because I raised a man of character, a man who understands that where you come from matters less than where you're going, but should never be forgotten or denied. Our journey wasn't easy. It was marked by pain, by mistakes, by moments of deep disillusionment. But it was our journey, and it made us who we are today, and that, in the end, is all that really matters.